We don't have anyone around, and I was by myself and Oscar. He wouldn't go with others, he wouldn't go and make new friends. He's a bit hesitant. So I said to them, like, he's like that. He wouldn't talk to everybody. He will just sit and play with his cars and take hours and hours. He can sit by himself, and he doesn't actually get involved with new activities. I had discussion with the cat.
Sometimes he struggled with routine, and it could be, and sometimes he was very stuck in routine where he just wanted the same thing, and then if something had changed, he didn't cope with that change. And at first, when I had to use Epic, I was kind of like, oh, what is this? All it was any child that I felt needed a little bit of extra support. You'd fill out some forms, do some observation on children, and then you'd get in contact with Kim, who plays a big part of it, and she's been amazing.
I oversee the rollout of our Early Intervention Services program.
And then she told me, why don't you come on and join the meeting with Jacinta.
So I'm here to actually help the educators to work with their family.
And then I lead the meeting just as a conduit between everyone in the room, ensuring that the conversation is child-focused. It's a bit of a thing to throw around, that the parent is the expert on their own child. We really want to make that real and tangible for parents and for families.
Coming here is looking at the teachers and telling them my difficulties and finding the answers, all the answers. It's like making new friends. It's like the best thing.
Jacinta's at the stage of assessing Oscar and talking to Mum about whether he is school ready.
The really important thing, it's one of the things that really comes out from it, is that the families are able to identify where their child needs support.
They're the only way I feel like, helping me through all this difficult time when I was by myself with Oscar. And I wouldn't, because at that time I didn't have anyone.
I know Mum's on her own here with Oscar, and so that just led us to do the best we can for Oscar.
All I know is these guys are helping me. They're friends to me. Hi, my name is Meena Rani, and I'm Oscar's mum.
And what's your name? Who is this?
Oscar.
Oscar! Okay, Oscar.
I'll do whatever it takes, for Oscar.
High five?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Oscar.
Okay.
Oh.
Good boy.
I am Robert De Silva. We are at the men's shed trying to show the kids from primary school as to how we work at the men's shed.
I know that we're probably going to be building some things and probably do some gardening and stuff like that. We've got the teachers said we're making some bee farms.
I'm excited to build the plants and the boxes.
Yeah, it's fun, yeah.
I've been in this program for almost 9 years now. We started the men's shed in 2011, and since then we have been working here. Mostly we do community work over here, helping the people to build up their schools.
They meet us and they have something to do with their grandparents, and when they see us they've got a new idea of what life is about.
Welcome everybody to this, our ordinary meeting of Council for the 8th of October 2019, which is now open. A warm welcome to members of the public gallery who have joined us tonight at the Civic Centre, as well as those watching via live streaming. Thank you for joining us. As well as being live streamed, the recording of this meeting will also be available on our website, so attendees in the gallery are advised that their presence may be recorded. I'd also just ask that mobile phones please be switched to silent mode during the meeting. On behalf of Moonee Valley City Council, I respectfully acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to their elders, spirits, community members past and present. I'd also like to extend this respect to other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. Councillors, I have received a request for approved leave of absence from Councillor Gachi Marici for the period October 7 to October 14 inclusive. Can I have a motion please that this leave be noted? Councillor Byrne, Councillor Sorais. Thank you. Any questions, councillors? Otherwise I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Councillors, can I please have a mover and a seconder that the minutes from the ordinary meeting of Council held on Tuesday 24th of September 2019 be confirmed? Councillor Sypek, Councillor Lawrence, thank you. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Does any councillor have a conflict of interest in any item on the agenda this evening, please? Councillor Nation?
Thank you, Mayor. I'm declaring an indirect conflict of interest for conflicting duty in item 10.5 for reasons previously disclosed to the CEO.
Thank you. Any other councillor? No. Presentations. I'd just like to make mention of some new artworks on display in our chamber. In this collection from Fireworks 2019, we celebrate portraiture in multiple forms, exploring ideas of identity, family, entropy and vulnerability. So if you can have a look at the large paintings along our walls up the back, they are quite beautiful, stunning to look at actually. Fireworks 2019 was originally exhibited at the Incinerator Gallery to showcase the art and design of Year 11 and 12 students who live, work or study in Moonee Valley, and Fireworks aims to provide a platform to display our local emerging artists and designers' works and to encourage their ongoing development. So we've got a bright future of artists in our municipality if those paintings are any gauge. Any other councillors, any other presentations tonight, councillors? I'm not sure there are, no. We do have two petitions, so councillors, can I please have a councillor present the petition titled Market Lane, Aspen Street, please.
Yes.
Councillor Marshall?
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. Council's received a petition with 144 signatures, and the petition is requesting changes to traffic flow around the new building located between Margaret Street, Market Lane and Aspen Street in Moonee Ponds. There are a number of reasons for the requested changes, and they include that vehicles accessing Market Lane, the car park entrance from Hall Street or Market Street need to turn right to enter the car park against the existing path of egress to the west in Market Lane. Reversing Market Lane traffic flow to the east, the car park access is straightforward, keeping left into the entrance. Car park egress is left turn, exit and exit west out Aspen Street or east via Hall Street. Also requesting to install a giveaway sign in Market Lane at the northeast corner of the Aspen Street's building for vehicles turning right to exit using either Aspen Street or via the private road to Hall Street. And also in keeping with the MPAC 2040 plan, the reversal of the traffic direction on the private road between Aspen Street and Hall Street, which they believe would give traffic two exit options to either Margaret Street or Mount Alexander Road. So Mayor, I'd like to move that Council resolves to 1, receive and note the petition, 2, refer this matter to the Director of Planning and Development for investigation and reporting back to Council, and 3, advise the petition organiser accordingly.
Thank you, Councillor Marshall. Do I have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Nation, thank you. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. We do have one further petition that's not on the agenda. Councillor Byrne, would you please table the petition titled Climate Emergency Declaration and read the motion?
Thank you, Madam. Excuse me. Thank you, Madam Mayor. I gladly will. So Council has received an online and hard copy petition with a total of 1,245 signatures, 1,098 of those being signatories from Moonee Valley residents requesting that Council declares a climate emergency. This petition was not received in time for it to be included on tonight's agenda, but I'm happy to table it tonight given the currency of the issue. Also noting there obviously is a notice of motion coming up later on in the night in regards to the climate emergency, so there'll be further discussion then.
Thank you.
So, sorry. Thanks, Madam Mayor. So I would like to resolve that Council resolves to 1, receive and note the petition, 2, refer this matter to the Director of Planning and Development for investigation and reporting back to Council, and 3, advise the petition organiser accordingly.
Thank you, Councillor Byrne. Do I have a seconder for that motion, please? Councillor Soares. Thank you. I shall put that to the vote. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. We now come to public question time, and I will note that we do have 2 questions received from Nicholas Beeman, but we didn't actually receive these questions in time via our online form. So if I could ask Mr. Beeman just to read his questions from the there you are, from the gallery, and then if you don't mind, we'll take them on notice and get back to you at our next council meeting and via letter too, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
Thank you.
Question 1, is there a waste management plan for the area surrounding the Caden development? As there's been ongoing issues from business waste, especially around Aspen Street East, that the council has yet to resolve. Question 2, what will the 700k from the Caden contribution be spent on? And will residents of the Caden development have a say on its spending and allocation? Noting that, yes, you do have that as an agenda item tonight as well. So
yes, yeah, that's right. Notice of motion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We will respond to those questions, Mr. Beeman. Thank you very much. Okay. Reports from special committees. We do not have any reports from special committees tonight, so we'll move straight into the first report, which is a planning application at 184 Maribyrnong Road, Moonee Ponds. So, councillors, do I have a motion, please? Councillor Cusack.
Madam Mayor, I'd like to move an alternative motion to the one in the officer's report, and I'm not sure whether it's been put up there. No. So for it's a oh, it is up there. Well, people can take note of the. Hang on a second. Oh, okay. So it is up there, but for those, I still have to read it out for those that are listening rather than watching. The screen up the top. So the council issue a notice of decision to refuse to grant a permit in relation to the planning permit application number MV/999/2018 for the construction of 3 double-storey dwellings and a reduction of car parking requirements at 184 Maribyrnong Road, Moonee Ponds, Lot 1 on the title plan 232844M on the following grounds. 1. The proposal fails to meet the overarching objective and strategies of Clause 15.02-2 urban design principles of the Moonee Valley Planning Scheme and would result in an urban design outcome that fails to positively contribute to the local character. 2. The proposal fails to meet the strategies contained within Clause 21.06-4 Objectives and Strategies Urban Design of the Moonee Valley Planning Scheme and would result in a development that fails to appropriately respond to its location and the surrounding context. 3. the proposal fails to meet the strategies contained within clause 22.03, stormwater management, water sensitive urban design, and results in a development which does not effectively manage stormwater on site. 4. The proposal does not provide the required number of car parking spaces pursuant to clause 52.06-5 car parking of the Moonee Valley Planning Scheme. 5. The proposal fails to meet the strategies contained within clause 53.18 stormwater management in urban development and results in a development which does not effectively manage stormwater on site. I think that's a repeat. Pardon me. 6. The proposal. So there might need to be a numbering issue there. Am I right? We'll solve that in a second. I think 3 and 6, 3 and 5 are the same. No, they're not. Oh, sorry, different clause reference. Sorry, beg my pardon. 6, the proposal will cause adverse traffic impacts on the surrounding area, which will be substantial and unreasonable. 7, the bulk scale, form and layout of the proposal fails to meet clause 55.02 of the Moonee Valley Planning Scheme, neighbourhood character and infrastructure objectives, and 21.06-1 objectives and strategies of neighbourhood character, as it does not respect the character of the existing neighbourhood or integrate well with the street. 8, the proposal fails to satisfy the following standards contained within clause 55, 2 or more dwellings on a lot, of the Moonee Valley Planning Scheme, and does not achieve an acceptable outcome in terms of the following objectives. A, clause 55.03-1, standard B6 street setback. B, clause 55.03-9, standard B14 access. C, clause 55.04-2, standard B18 walls on boundaries. D, clause 55.005-4, standard B28 private open space. And finally E, clause 55.06-4, standard B34 site services. 9, the proposed development presents an overdevelopment of the site site due to the lack of consideration given to the siting of the dwellings and its response to its corner location. And 10, the proposal will have an unreasonable adverse effect on residential amenity of neighbouring land.
Thank you, Councillor Cusack. Do I have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Nation, thank you. Are there any questions, councillors? Otherwise, Councillor Cusack, would you like to speak to your motion?
Thank you, Mayor. I will briefly. The motion is reasonably straightforward and self-explanatory in many ways. Possibly the nub of this motion lies in the last couple of clauses. In fact, the proposal will have an unreasonable adverse effect on the residential amenity of the neighbouring land, and it also goes to the fact that there is still considerable questions around the siting of the buildings, the bulk and scale, the loss of car parking in the area with the additional crossovers, and also that I suppose a critical thing for me is that when this went to VCAT, the decision of VCAT was very much about reducing the height, which was to take a storey off, and also to reduce the number of dwellings, and that was the response. However, in framing their response, we still get an inability to come back within the context of the whole of the planning scheme. There are still issues that are outstanding. I would have thought that if you had had a VCAT decision against you and you went ahead and recast your proposal and a new plan and took it back to the community, you would address a number of other outstanding matters so that they could be taken care of. And we had, and I know it's in the other motion, in the officer's recommendation of the report, we have references to things like clotheslines being shifted and put into certain places, but I can't see how you could get a clothesline designed to be in a new plan where it was being proposed to be located. I don't know how these sorts of things can actually happen, and it makes me worry that in fact we've got a development again that is challenging our neighbourhood character. It's challenging the lifestyle of existing people, and yet is still not making the effort. And in doing that challenge, it doesn't create something that is for the long term, for the beauty of the area. It doesn't take into account the garden characteristics of the area, and the neighbourhood characteristics, and so on like that. It only pays scant regard to things like sustainability and so on like that. And for something that is now proposed to stand for the next 50 or 100 years, like the other properties that are in Latrobe Street and surrounding it in Maribyrnong Road, I seriously wonder whether it would actually stand the test of time and be embraced as an interesting place for the long term, as the other properties have. And it doesn't smack to me that it is actually a notion of creating an additional thing for community benefit. In this, we are losing something which should have been maybe fixed or whatever some time ago, but the reality is that we're not creating something that is enhancing Maribyrnong Road as a major thoroughfare in this municipality. Instead, we're getting somewhere along the lines of it's kind of okay. And I don't know that our community should be accepting that notion of it's kind of okay and that it works within planning generally. Why can't we just get something that complies with what's actually there, what the rules are actually trying to say? Now, I know that sometimes you have to bend them and crack them a little bit because not every place is exactly the same and you can't have one size fits all. But really, when you kind of restart, I think you need to restart with goodwill rather than with having a site for an eye for a dollar, rather than what's best for the community.
Thank you, Councillor Cusack. Councillor Nation, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Mayor, and I am obviously speaking in support of the refusal put forward by Councillor Cusack. As he mentioned, it's a little bit like deja vu. We were here mid-last year, debating an application on the very same site. That application was 4 dwellings on this site. It was 2 3-bedders and 2 2-bedders. As we can see in the meeting papers, this application is for 3 dwellings, all 3-bedders, all 2 stories. On top of the points raised by Councillor Cusack, I also wanted to touch on this idea of neighbourhood character. The officer's report states under neighbourhood character that the character of the area can be described as transitional, featuring many multi-unit developments along Maribyrnong Road. Now, this is true, but it's predominantly only true to the southern side of Maribyrnong Road. And I remember saying these exact lines when the previous application came before us, that you need to look at the northern side and the southern side of Maribyrnong Road as 2 completely separate areas. And unsurprisingly, they are actually 2 completely separate suburbs. The northern side being Moonee Ponds and the southern side being Ascot Vale. That southern side, there's large developments, multi-unit developments, big strata titles. The northern side is predominantly small, titles, single dwellings, and even when you look at the corner properties on each of the surrounding streets, so you go east, Hotham has a single dwelling on each corner, Canterbury has a single dwelling on each corner, you go west, Darling has a single dwelling on each corner, and so does Bowen. So that highlights how critical it is that any development on this site is appropriate to the surrounding area and doesn't set a precedent for future developments. The actual block we're talking about is not big. It's 453 square metres, and we're talking about 3 double-storey, 3-bedroom dwellings with a site coverage, unsurprisingly, of 60%, 0.00, the maximum allowable under Res Code. That is without compliance with street setbacks, walls on boundaries, landscaping, private open space, and the application doesn't provide the required number of car spaces. So you can see just from that little summary that in the context of this area, I personally don't think this is an appropriate dwelling. I know the residents around who live in the area don't think it's an appropriate dwelling or dwellings for that site. And then touching on that VCAT ruling, I'll just get a small extension if I may, Mayor.
Sorry, thank you.
When touching on that VCAT ruling, one of the key parts of that VCAT ruling was about the visual bulk and the built form presenting to the streetscape. When you look at the mock-ups, the renders of this new application, and you look on that Latrobe Street side, it is still just continuous built form. It is 2 stories of continuous built form. So I don't think that in any way addresses that VCAT ruling regarding the visual bulk. Yes, it's down a story, but it is still continuous 2 stories built form. There is a little bit of articulation where the stairwells come up, but it still is at that 6 or 7 metre height. So based on that previous VCAT ruling, based on the area, based on its non-compliance with Res Code, more than happy to support Councillor Cusack's refusal of this application.
Thank you, Councillor Nation. Any other councillor wish to speak to this motion? Councillor Marshall?
Thanks, Mayor. I will briefly, because Councillor Cusack and Nation have both covered very eloquently most of the points that I wanted to talk about. In particular, this issue of neighbourhood character and the failure for me for the recommendation and the application itself to recognise the incredibly distinct differences outlined by Councillor Nation. I live on the southern side of that border, and they are just totally separate neighbourhoods. So it's a real shame to me that there wasn't that recognition that just because something is over the road, it doesn't mean that that's appropriate for the other side when all that is surrounding you is so incredibly different. I'm also really mindful, and I've spoken about this before in council, about that trap that you can fall into in just focusing on dwelling numbers. So I certainly do acknowledge the reduction in height, and that is absolutely a benefit to this application over the previous one. But in some ways, the previous application was, for me, one of the easier ones that I've ever supported a refusal for. And often we go to VCAT thinking, oh, this is a bit of a roll of the dice, but that one clearly was an inappropriate development in so many ways. And this one is a little more difficult in the sense that the height has been brought down and there have been some changes to the design to try and reduce that sense of bulk. But they are still now, rather than being 4 smaller dwellings, they are 3 larger dwellings. And that's why we really need to be careful in just thinking about dwelling numbers. You need to think, what does the actual dwelling itself look like? So that mass to Latrobe Street, again, is of significant concern to me, and I don't think the amendments to the design made to date are sufficient to reduce that bulk and that sense of change to the streetscape that would occur if the development in this form was to go ahead. There certainly should have been greater, really distinct breaks in the dwellings to reflect what is around the area, but the problem is when you're dealing with a relatively small lot size and trying to put on quite large dwellings, that you just don't have the space to do that. And Councillor Cusack touched on this issue of the clotheslines, and In some ways, that in itself you would think is a relatively minor issue. But in this instance, what it signifies is the fact that they have tried to put too much on the block, and that instead of come up with, in relation to the clothesline issue, what is an extremely suboptimal outcome. And our officers have said that that could be addressed by conditions, but for me, it's thinking about the where and what are the flow-ons of that. And as I said, what it signifies is that real sense of trying to get too much out of this particular block. And the concerns around stormwater, again, are very significant. And given this is the second time that we've had an application in relation to this site, I really would have hoped that those matters could have been addressed and dealt with at this particular stage without trying to rely on conditions to rectify them. So I'm happy to support the motion, and we'll see how it goes.
Thank you, Councillor Marshall. Does any other councillor wish to speak to this motion? No other councillor? I shall put that to the vote then. All those in favour? All those against? No. So I'll read out all those in favour: Councillor Thrace, Councillor Sypek, Councillor Nation, Councillor Marshall, Councillor Byrne, Councillor Cusack, Councillor Lawrence. All those against me, so that motion is carried. The next report is agenda item 10.2, and it's planning application at 261A, 261B and 261C, Keeler Road, Essendon. Councillors, do I have a motion, please? Yes? What would you like to move?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'll just move the officer's recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Any other? No. Do I need? I need a seconder for that motion, please. Councillor Sypek, thank you. Are there any questions, councillors? Councillor Lawrence, would you like to speak to the item?
I would. Thank you, Madam Mayor. This application is a change from a application that came before Council on March 27th, 2018, and originally it was for a 20 apartment block, which was passed by the ordinary council meeting of that date, and it's now been altered by the applicant to a different modification and looking for 40 a serviced apartment hotel. There was no consultation with this, with the objectors and the applicant with this new amended application because there weren't enough objectors, so there was no consultation at that time. The main changes of the application is a removal of the basement car park and removal of bicycle racks and the installation of an external sign for hotel residents, and also obviously the change from 20 residential apartment blocks to 40 serviced apartments. Now, the change is still within the footprint that the original was put on the original application, so there's no change in the size of the building. There's probably, if anything, a reduction in the size of the balconies that exist on the property, and that's probably a good thing. And I can say that that as tourism and the visitor economy increases in the northwest, it's probably not a bad application that is being proposed, in that it's on a main busy road, being Keeler Road, and it's short-term accommodation, and the visitors that will obviously come into our area need this type of accommodation. And obviously the applicant, I dare say, is considering that there's an opportunity that exists for these apartments. The conditioning of the application is quite considerable, and the planning department has left very little stone unturned. There's over 40 conditions, which I won't go through because we'll be here all night, but suffice to say that the main issue that I would say is the overriding one in terms of the reduction in car parking. There's now 11 car parks instead of the obviously the basement car park providing far more than that. However, most people, and I'm included in this, that travel to apartments such as this would either use taxi, Uber or public transport, be that tram or train. So this will no doubt alleviate some of the need for the large car parking numbers that were originally going to be proposed as part of the original proposal, which is now defunct. The zoning is commercial 1, so it fits in pretty nicely in terms of what's the requirement for the zone. And as I said, there was a reduction in the size of the balconies. There's also been some screening for the neighbouring properties that will not be looked into now. So essentially it's a good application. I think it's something that is certainly encouraged within our municipality, and if we can increase our visitor economy, then it's only going to see more people use the restaurants and the like in Keilor Road, which is a good thing. So that to me says that maybe it's not, we don't need more residential, but maybe short-term accommodation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Councillor Sypek, would you like to speak? No? Any other councillor wish to speak to this motion? Councillor Byrne?
Thanks, Madam Mayor. I won't be supporting this motion, and I do so because back in March 2018, I think when it was a unanimous decision in the council and chamber that night, and it was discussed how people were sort of weighing up, how people were somewhat not fond of the overall bulk, and there were actually some amendments moved which actually reduced the bulk and scale, which were quite good at the time. But adding it up, weighing it up, it was approved. And in my mind, just. And one of the things that was just was that ground floor activation on Keilor Road and having that shop front entrance on that bottom level. You know, potentially another Grady or Re-Up or another restaurant, cafe, whatever it might be, shop front, that people could come into and go out of and really liven up that bit of Keilor Road. With the changes that are proposed, turning into apartments, the shop entrance is going to be replaced with a hotel lobby. And for me, whilst it will still have, you know, people coming in to go to one of the 40 apartments, I don't envisage that as the same frontage as what I imagined would really help that area thrive. And so when I weigh everything up now, for me it falls below the line. I understand what Councillor Lawrence says in terms of people coming in can help stimulate the restaurants and whatnot. But for me, I then go back to the bulk and the size and what's actually being proposed, and I just don't feel comfortable with it, so I won't be supporting this tonight.
Thank you, Councillor Byrne. Any other councillor wish to speak to this motion? Councillor Lawrence, would you like to close? No, sorry, there's no ability to ask questions tonight.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Only just to say that it was a unanimous decision back in 2018, March, by the councillors in this chamber, and for me that is more than just getting approved. It's everybody agreeing that it was a suitable application at the time, and now that we've seen a change in the applicant's design, externally there's pretty little change. It's just maybe some changes in the size of the rooms inside the building. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. I shall put that to the vote. All those in favour? I'll call everybody out. Councillor Sorais, Councillor Sypek, Councillor Marshall, Councillor Sharp, Councillor Cusack, Councillor Lawrence. All those against? Councillor Nation, Councillor Byrne. That motion is carried. Agenda item 10.3 is the Domestic Animal Management Plan 2017 to 2021 Progress Report. Councillors, do I have a motion, please? Councillor Lawrence.
Move the officer's recommendation, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder for that motion, please? Councillor Sypek, thank you. Are there any questions, councillors? Councillor Lawrence, would you like to speak to the motion?
Only very brief, Madam Mayor. It's a report for the Domestic Animal Welfare and Lost Pets within Moonee Valley City Council. It's good to see that 88% of lost pets that end up at the Lost Dogs Home are actually returned to their owners. I think that's a good result for people who own pets. And in Buckley Ward we have a high rate of dog owners. I think we've got the highest rate of the three wards, being around about 27%. I being one of those owners, but it's great to see so many households with dogs in Buckley Ward. I think it's fantastic. The issue that does concern me is the cat euthanasia rates that continues to be high, and I'm not sure the reasoning behind that, but I note that officers will be investigating that and trying to come to a consensus as to how they can look at changing that. I do note one thing on the report, that there was no consultation taken place with the Northern Dog Obedience Club located in Aberfeldy, and that's a very active club and probably one of the larger of our dog clubs. I don't know if there's any other dog clubs actually in Moonee Valley. There probably is. Anyway, it would have been nice to see that in this report that there had been some consultation with that group, given their enthusiasm and connection, obviously, with dogs. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Councillor Sypek, would you like to speak to the motion? Any other councillor wish to speak to this motion? Councillor Cusack.
Just a couple of observations, just to tack on to the end of what Councillor Lawrence was saying, as he raised the issue of Northern Obedience, Dog Obedience Group. I'd like to see this report over time pick up on some of those other areas around our domestic management, and that goes with things like off-leash dog parks, their usage, how that is working in local communities, how they're being supported and so on like that. Maybe what are the prospects elsewhere, and what are the lessons learnt. The other one that struck me is that we're silent also on the notion of companion animals and their therapeutic value in obviously situations with people who are isolated in our community for whatever reason, old or young, and I think that somewhere along the line we should be thinking more strategically about how our pets and all the rest of it actually play into a whole integrated notion of feeling better, healthier, and more connected.
Thank you, Councillor Cusack. Any other councillor? I shall put that to the vote. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. The next item is 10.4 and relates to the election period policy. Councillors, do I have a motion, please? I went that way, sorry. I saw Councillor Lawrence. Sorry. Councillor Lawrence, would you like to second it?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to move the officer's report with a slight amendment, if I may.
Yes.
Do you want me to read that now?
Yes, please.
Thank you. The Council resolves to adopt the election period policy provided as attachment A with the following additions. Section 2.2 reads that the use of council-issued resources, including officers, support staff, hospitality services, mobile phones and numbers and computers, iPads and stationery will be used exclusively for normal council business during the election period, subject to existing policies, protocols and terms of use, and will not be used in connection with any election campaign. Council standing for re-election must not use council-issued equipment, including mobile phones and numbers, laptops, tablets and computers or printers as a resource to assist with election campaigns. Council-issued email addresses are not to be used in election campaigns. Section 4.5 reads that council website and social media content regarding councillors must be limited to names, titles, council-issued phone number and email addresses, membership of special committees and other bodies to which councillors have been appointed by council. And D, authorise the Chief Executive Officer to make amendments to the election period policy as required to ensure correctness and compliance with the legislation that does not materially alter the intent of the policy.
What Councillor Lawrence read out is different to what's on the screen. So just wanted to confirm, Councillor Lawrence, whether your motion does include that there will be no councillor mobile numbers on the website during the election period, and an alternative phone number will be provided, as well as a link to the VEC website.
If I could see all the screen, it would be very helpful.
It's just that bit, that last two.
Okay, I thought you were referring to the whole body. There will be no council mobile phone numbers on the website during the election period. An alternate phone number will be provided as well as a link to the VEC website. Okay, so that's altered from what I have in front of me. Yes, well, I'm happy to go with that.
Okay. So your amendment includes everything that's on the screen?
Yes.
But you also, I think you also read out a point D. Yeah. Oh, B.
Oh, that's
yeah.
That's just at the bottom of the...
Okay, so the motion is as per the screen, or as per it was being read out. So, mover, do I have a second of that? Councillor Marshall, thank you. Are there any questions, councillors? Councillor Nation?
A question, Madam Mayor. The second point on the board, on the screen, possibly it's just me having been away and not understanding it correctly, but I would have thought that second dot point slightly contradictory, stating that the council website and social media content be limited to names, titles, council issued phone number, but then in the subsequent sentence reads there'll be no council mobile phone numbers on the website. Is that?
I can ask for a point of clarification from
Thank you.
Ms Pope, please.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I think that whilst on face value it might look inconsistent, I think if we read it with the clarifying point that the numbers that the council would provide for contact to councillors in their role as councillors during the caretaker period would in fact be an office-based number, then it's not inconsistent. It is the reference in the early part of the paragraph is to the council issued phone number, and we provide further clarification that the number that we would provide would be a council office-based number, i.e. not your mobile number, and then we would link to the VEC, which would include your mobile contact details.
Any other questions? Otherwise, I will ask Councillor Lawrence to speak to the motion.
I think it's fairly self-explanatory, Madam Mayor. It's really just tidying up an issue that I think we're all aware of. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Marshall, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thanks, Mayor. I will. So, Council is required to review its election period policy in accordance with the Local Government Act, and it's pretty amazing to think in 12 months' time we will actually be in caretaker period, and with the election just around the corner, only a matter of weeks. So in reviewing the policy and creating the policy, essentially there's a few principles that apply. And importantly, you don't want a council in its last days to make decisions that are inappropriate, so are significant decisions or decisions that will either advantage existing councillors, if you like, or bind future councils to significant matters when you have a new fresh council coming on board, they should have the ability to make decisions anew. But it's really important too that existing councillors aren't advantaged by using what are pretty extensive council resources to get their, if you like, their name out there to promote themselves, because it's an inappropriate use of what are ratepayer funded resources to do that. So what we're doing in this policy, and it's very stringent, and I think the community and people who might be running for council who aren't current councillors can take some heart from the fact that we're actually putting very strict protocols around what can be done in that time. The points up here are additional points to provide some clarity, because some councillors do use their own phones, which they pay for in their council work, and that's absolutely fine. But to make sure that those phone numbers, which they will rightly use in their campaigning, there's no issue with that at all, but those phone numbers are not then included on the council website and then promoted more broadly. So it's very simple. There's nothing sinister about it all. It's just making sure that there's a level playing field for all candidates. And again, we've got up there that we'll have the alternative phone number for people, because people who are candidates are still councillors during that caretaker period. And they will still want to contact councillors, so that a phone number will be provided, and there'll also be the link to the VEC website, which will contain all candidates' contact details. So I think this is a really fair policy and a really appropriate and prudent policy, so I'm happy to support it.
Thank you, Councillor Marshall. Any other councillor wish to speak to this motion? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. The next item is 10.5 and relates to the 2019-20 Capital Works Program update. Councillors, do I have a motion, please?
Sorry, Mayor, I've declared a conflict of interest, so I'll leave the chambers.
Yes, sorry, I should have written that down. Thank you. Okay, agenda item 10.5 relates to the 1920 Capital Works Program update. Councillors, do I have a motion, please? Councillor Sypek?
I'm happy to move the officer's recommendation, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Cusack, thank you. Are there any questions, councillors? Otherwise, Councillor Sypek, would you like to speak to the motion?
I'll be very brief, Madam Mayor. This is just an update on our Capital Works program. I think it's very self-explanatory, so I'm just happy to go straight to the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Sypek. Councillor Cusack, would you like to speak to the motion?
Mayor, there are a number of changes to the Capital Works project that people can see in the report. They're all been assessed and looked at, and while there is a gross figure there for each of them, they are broken down, and I'm comfortable that in terms of things like the cost of, for the Aberfeldy Park West, for argument's sake, the cost of lighting and plumbing fees and so on like that were all properly accounted for, and there we also see where there are variations in respect of the leisure centres and overland reserve and the communications plan, and these are all matters that have been addressed through discussion within audit, and they have progressed through council and are well within the bounds and what is reasonable for us. So. What's well within reason of the budget.
Thank you, Councillor Cusack. Any other councillor? I shall put that to the vote. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Could Councillor Nation please be called back? Thank you. Okay, agenda item 10.6 is the response to petition Cashmere Street, Travancore. Councillors, do I have a motion, please? Motion, please. Councillor Cusack.
I support the officer's recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Cusack. Do I have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Marshall. Thank you. Are there any questions, councillors? Otherwise, Councillor Cusack, would you like to say a few words?
Mayor, I have supported the recommendation because I know I'm going to get my head chopped off at some stage over this one, but it's the most difficult and vexed question, parking in Cashmere Street. if people know it, it's a very narrow street. We've got the tyranny of cars taking over and swallowing our neighbourhoods, and that's happening in Cashmere Street as much as it's happening anywhere else. It also is a street that has a number of cars where people are parking from the school, and also we have a number of other people who are parking down around there and doing the old park and ride routine to go up to the local tram stop. And this is all in a street where if two cars are parked, one on either side of the street, it is mission impossible to get any sort of emergency vehicle down there. You cannot get a garbage truck down that street. And just your everyday average Holden is basically losing its mirrors. So there's been an attempt to try and work through some options to create a herringbone approach to it and to reduce the congestion that's around parking from the school and so on like that. Some of the biggest problems associated with this, I think, is that it always works around goodwill, and it works around the goodwill of people picking it up and doing it. And there is always that other pressure that we always have, which is, why can't I get a park right out the front of my house when other people seem to be able to get it? So I'm not sure that we won't hear from the residents of Cashmere Street again, but at least we're putting something to them. And I know that we have to try something, and there's no doubt that that's what we're doing. Now, it may have also some educative effect in the sense that those people who can access parking via the laneways and come into the backs of properties will actually do that. But I know for a fact that a lot of the people who actually live in Cashmere Street have taken those old garages off the laneways and they've made them into all sorts of amazing in-house things on their properties, but they're nothing like a garage anymore. So we have some opportunity maybe to change some attitude around that. So I suppose I'll fly it, we'll see where we go, and living just around the corner, I'm sure I'll be bailed up.
Thank you, Councillor Cusack. Councillor Marshall.
I am tempted just to say ditto, but I certainly agree this is a really difficult issue to get that balance right, and this is in response to a petition that we received. So it is a proposal which I'm sure we will receive feedback on, good or bad, good and bad, but hopefully it's one way of trying to seek to balance what are competing interests and complexities around the particular street, and we will see how it goes.
Thank you, Councillor Marshall. Any other councillor wish to speak to this motion? Councillor Nation?
Just briefly to touch on the idea of maintaining some unrestricted parking. Quite often when residents speak to us about getting parking restrictions in their street, it isn't necessarily understood that not everyone that lives in that street may be entitled to receive a permit or permits and be able to park on the street. And therefore, in the response and the officer's recommendation, there is that maintenance of unrestricted parking, and it is noted in the report that there are a number of residents who live in the street that wouldn't actually be able to park in zones that would be considered permit only, and therefore the inclusion of those unrestricted, the 20 unrestricted parking spaces.
Thank you, Councillor Nation. Any other councillor wish to speak to this motion? Otherwise, I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. The next item of business is notices of motion, and we have two tonight. So I would first like to call on Councillor Marshall to present her notice of motion entitled Cadence Developer Contribution.
Thanks, Mayor. I would like to move that Council resolves to allocate $729,545.45 in the 2020-21 Capital Works budget specifically to projects in the Moonee Ponds area, and that any further developer contributions be allocated directly to projects within the development area. The $729,545.45 relates to the Caden Developer Contribution Council receipted to consolidated revenue in 2018-19.
Thank you, Councillor Marshall. Do I have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Cusack? Thank you. Councillor Marshall, would you like to speak to your motion?
Thank you. Firstly, just in relation to the difference in the figure there as opposed to, that was in the agenda as opposed to the motion that's been moved, that was just after seeking some clarification, and the amount that was on our website in our transparency section included a GST amount, but I've been advised by finance that this is the correct figure for the way that we account for these types of contributions, so I just wanted to clarify that. This notice of motion came about after we had some discussions and it became apparent that Cadence had made a contribution in this amount and that amount had been put into our consolidated revenue. And I'd sort of had asked some questions around what it was being used for and then realised that it had been put into the general pool of money, if you like, that we hold. So when I reflected on this and thought about what community expectations would be for these types of contributions, and also what the expectations would be of the people actually making the contribution, I think it's probably fair to say that there would be the expectation that that sort of money would be used for projects within the particular development area. So this motion makes it clear that that money should be used for projects in the Moonee Ponds area. And also more generally, as a matter of principle, just to make it absolutely clear that where we receive developer contributions that are negotiated, so this won't be an issue when our developer contribution plan comes on board into our planning scheme eventually, because it makes it very clear that those amounts are for particular projects within particular allocated areas. But where we have, if you like, these separate contributions that are negotiated, I don't think I'm the only one who would view the importance of making sure that they are used in the area where the infrastructure needs and demands are created due to the particular development. So it's fairly simple that way, but I think we just need to make it absolutely clear that this is the view of council, and that should this issue arise in the future, that is what happens. And we had a question earlier, so what the money is used for will obviously be an important question, but we will certainly be looking at that as part of the budget process.
Thank you, Councillor Marshall. Councillor Cusack, would you like to speak to the motion?
The motion recognises that there is massive change occurring in Moonee Ponds, both in that very central core area that formed the old market site, but also how the stone has dropped into the pond and is causing the ripples that go out across that part of the municipality. This Moonee Ponds was often considered the jewel in the crown for Moonee Valley, and has been subject to huge development and dislocation for quite some time because of various proposals that either didn't get up, and when they did get up, what they've given us is a lot of grief and hard work. So out of all of this, we do get that contribution from Cadence. It's also a way of actually contributing and making a contribution to council's bigger plan, which is about how we support a changed lifestyle for a larger group of people who are living in a tighter community. And where you have density doesn't necessarily mean that you're creating something that is something that shouldn't be desirable. It should be something that can be also beautiful and green. And so that we need to make sure that this funding stays allocated in and around where it was generated from. And so I commend Councillor Marshall on taking this motion forward, and also for the work that will flow from it into the future.
Thank you, Councillor Cusack. Any other councillor like to speak to this motion? Councillor Serace?
Thank you, Councillor Marshall, for bringing that motion to the table. This was never, the cadence development was never an application that this council actually approved. It was approved through the Minister's office. So we're left with this development in that area, and I think it is fantastic that Councillor Marshall has actually moved that money get reinstated into that area as a buffer or as a bit of a pleaser, whatever you might want to call that, to put back into that community and to create some beautification work. So well done.
Any other councillor wish to speak to this motion? No? I'll put that to the vote then. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. And the second notice of motion, I call on Councillor Marshall to present her second notice of motion entitled Declaration of Climate Emergency.
Thanks, Mayor. I would like to move that Council resolves to 1. Acknowledge the Environment Portfolio Advisory Committee's recommendation to Council to declare and acknowledge the climate emergency on the terms set out below. 2. Declare and acknowledge the climate emergency and, in doing so, A. Acknowledge the achievements of the Council in addressing issues related to climate change to date. B. Agree that the implementation of MV 2040, specifically the Green Action Plan, will form the basis of Council's response to the climate emergency. C. Note that Council's MV 2040 vision statement includes that our neighbourhoods are beautiful, sustainable and hold strong community connections which enable citizens and the environment to be healthy and resilient. And D. Note this declaration will enable Council to publicly demonstrate the leadership position that its past, current and future strategic work has delivered and will deliver, and to advocate to its community and other levels of government for a coordinated response to the issue of climate change.
Happy to second that, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Marshall, seconded by Councillor Sypek. Thank you. Councillor Marshall, would you like to speak to your motion?
Thanks, Mayor. So before I start, I would quickly like to do some thanks, if you'll just indulge me for a bit. I'd like to thank Logan Shield for the work that he's done in a very short period of time to actually bring attention to us as a council of the high level of community support in relation to a declaration of a climate emergency, and Councillor Byrne presented the petition earlier tonight, which was great. To the Environment Portfolio Advisory Committee, and there are a number of you who have come tonight, which I really do appreciate. I have to say it is an absolute privilege for me to chair that committee, and every meeting I walk away having learnt something, and it's a real living example of the importance of collaboration and that recognition that we don't know all the answers and we have such expertise and knowledge. And I'd have to also, certainly for Sarah, Sandra and Steph, officers who have contributed so much to that committee, I thank them. I have to particularly thank John Knox, who is here tonight, sitting there. John, thank you for what you did to bring this to our attention and to help drive this coming to council. It really is appreciated. And John is a fabulous person who does so much and is so knowledgeable, so thank you. Supporting the climate emergency declaration is a real opportunity for us as a council to show leadership and to demonstrate to our community and to future generations that we are willing to do something about the unprecedented threat associated with climate change. And in doing so, we'll join over 1,000 jurisdictions across the world, including over 50 local governments in Australia and many in Victoria who have gone down this path and made such a declaration. We know that the international scientific community accepts that the increases in greenhouse gases due to human activity have been the dominant cause of global warming since the mid-20th century. And we certainly know in Victoria that if you look at overall, we have warmer and drier conditions, and the modelling done by the CSIRO and the Bureau of Meteorology predicts that those trends will continue. And so what that means is that we will face more severe conditions. We'll have severe droughts, more heat waves and more significant bushfire activity. But we know that climate change isn't just about weather and the climate, and it is about so much more, and that's where we as a council have such an important role to play. It is about health, it's about well-being and safety, it's about economics, it's about justice, and it's about humanitarianism. And we've seen that this is happening on a global stage, on a statewide stage. We certainly need to see more happen, but interestingly, the Victorian Public Health and Wellbeing Plan, the recent one, has for the first time earmarked tackling climate change and its impact on health as a key priority to be addressed in order to keep Victorians happy and healthy. The World Health Organisation has described climate change as the biggest threat to health in the 21st century, and we know that it will impact our health and wellbeing through many different mechanisms, through the extreme events that I referred to earlier, through worsening air quality, changes in the spread of infectious diseases, the threats to food and water quality and quantity. We know that international acknowledgement through the Paris Agreement has occurred and that there is real momentum building around the world, and that sense of urgency is absolutely building. And we're seeing that many countries are leading the charge to reduce emissions, transitioning away from fossil fuels. We have got students and so many others who are protesting and really taking action in relation to climate change and their concerns about the inaction. And I, along with so many thousands of Victorians, recently joined the climate strike with my kids, and it was just incredible to see the real diversity of people for whom this is an issue. This is not just something that's now a niche issue worried about by particular demographics. This is a concern for so many people across the community, and I certainly see that in my role as the environmental portfolio holder. The contact that I've had in the past couple of years has just increased exponentially from people who want council to do what we can. It's great too that we have seen massive changes in Australian households, and we need to see more changes because individually we have such an important role to play. We've got over 2 million households now having rooftop solar, and that number is increasing rapidly. And I think from the information I've got here, just over 10 years ago, there was only about 85,000 houses with solar. So that's an enormous increase in a relatively short period of time. And there was some recent information tracking where that solar is occurring. And it's fascinating again when you look at the demographics because they challenge the assumptions that people might make about who is interested in the issue of climate change. So while our words are really important, action is what matters. And if we look at what this council has done to date, we can see that we haven't stood idly by and we won't stand idly by. I won't go through everything that we've done because I'm sure other councillors will like to speak to some of those matters, but I will touch briefly on some of the things that we have achieved and we will continue to do. So since 2007, we've reduced our own greenhouse gas emissions by 44%. We have committed to switching to 100% renewable energy, and I think as a community we can be so proud of the work that our officers have done to be one of the leading councils in actually bringing together 48 Victorian local governments to form what is Australia's largest ever buying group for renewable energy. Oh yes, sorry, Mayor, I should have asked up front. So that's going to result, this is our tender, going through the tender process, but the pooling of 250 gigawatts of renewable energy, and again, we're being advised that that's equivalent to powering 47,000 homes with renewable energy or taking 87,000 cars off the road each year. So that is a significant and meaningful action that this council has played a lead role in undertaking. In relation to solar panels, again, over a period of a bit less than 10 years on our own buildings, we've had 29 of council's buildings be installed with solar panels, and that's come up with a massive saving per year, over 1,000 tonnes of carbon emissions annually, which has been reduced, and also the significant financial savings that have gone along with that too. We're planting now, getting up towards 3,000 mature trees each year, and we've set our target, which we all know, we're award nominees for that target to increase our tree canopy cover to 30%. And again, that's such an important part of the picture about that capture of CO2 from the atmosphere. As I said, I won't go through all of these because I know other councils will want to talk to them, but we have installed plumbed rainwater tanks on council-owned buildings. We have introduced hybrid electric and full electric vehicles to our vehicle fleet. And we've also introduced the collection of food and organic waste with our green bins to reduce greenhouse gas emissions that come from the organic waste going to landfill. So I suppose all of that is a very long way of saying what we've done and will do, but with MV 2040 we've got 4 very key strategic directions related to and relevant to the issue of climate change. They are that we aspire for a city that is low carbon, a city that is green and water sensitive, a city that rethinks waste, and a city that is cool and climate adapted. And so through our Green Action Plan, which we're doing the consolidation of that for other action plans at the moment, but we have some really important actions that we will be implementing that will help us address the issue of climate change in Moonee Valley and more broadly. Just again, I'll be really brief, but I mentioned the 100% renewable electricity. We have a real role to play in supporting and educating our community to make good choices, because often it is about information and saying this is how we can help you to achieve your personal goals, because most people have that goodwill and they want to do something, and we have lots of expertise and knowledge and assistance we can provide. We can continue and we will continue to retrofit our buildings, and we will make sure that our new infrastructure and old infrastructure is climate resilient. And we've also got numerous projects with stormwater harvesting, again, that will help use that water so we don't have to then go and tap into the mains water. So we've got really a significant list of things that we will be doing, but it is really important to note that that with MV 2040 and the Green Action Plan, that they are documents that will be reviewed frequently. So they're not set in stone, they're not just here's what we're doing and that's it. As issues and opportunities and challenges arise in the future, that those plans will adopt to reflect those and to continue to make sure that we do all we can as a council to help address the issue of climate change and to take action. So tonight, councillors, we have a real opportunity to show leadership, and we have a real opportunity to acknowledge the role that all of us play in addressing the issue of climate change, and it is absolutely imperative that we act now. We are really well placed to do so, and we have great policy support. Importantly, we've got a ready and willing community who desperately want action and desperately want to do what they can and to help us do what we can to mitigate the impacts of climate change. So in making this declaration, we will call on all individuals, we'll call on other levels of government, we'll call on industry and other organisations to collaborate together and to implement meaningful measures to actually address climate change. In making this declaration, we will show to our community that we will do what we can to protect them, to safeguard them, and to provide for those who come after us a future that is filled with hope.
Thank you, Councillor Marshall. Councillor Sypek, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. I received a lot of phone calls, a lot of emails, a lot of contact from both sides of this argument, people who were for the emergency and people who weren't for the emergency. And I struggled, and I was a 50-50 on this, and I'll explain a little bit later in my talk why I've changed my mind and second this motion of Councillor Marshall's. I struggled with the emergency because I believe that Moonee Valley as a council has been doing great things in this area, and I think we're ahead of the game, and we already probably declared an emergency before it was an emergency. So we were way ahead of the game. And just a couple of examples would be, we have sporting clubs in our municipality that were inspired by what we're doing with climate change and reducing greenhouse gases, that they actually went and applied to the federal government and got a grant for solar panelling. I mean, that's a club that went out on their own and got this stuff for themselves, which was really, really good. We've also provided grants to a number of sporting clubs who have now installed their own 100 kilowatts of solar panelling as well. We have also replaced over 6,000 lights with more energy efficient technology, reducing emissions by more than 2,100 tonnes a year. We have adopted a sustainable building program facilitator guidelines to apply to all new buildings facilities, and that council designs and constructs including upgrades that provide clear benchmarks and guidance on what constitutes best practice environmental sustainable design, ESD. In July, we also endorsed offerings to enter into an environmental upgrade agreement, a financing mechanism where commercial building owners obtain finance to undertake environmental improvement works to their buildings, with the loan payments repaid through council rates and then passed on to the lenders. Not only, we also support a lot of community gardens within the Moonee Valley municipality, which is a great initiative that we fully support them 100%. We've also increased our tree canopy, and I can tell you in front of my place, I had one Melaleuca tree which died and got replaced by 2 gum trees. Great for me, I have got 2 trees now on my main strip, even though I've got a nice long nature strip. But more importantly, our bee program. We used to kill bees when we found hives, and we were all shocked by this. And I think it was last year or the year before, we moved to actually rehoming bees. And if all bees died today throughout the whole world, we would only have 2 years of food left. We would all starve within 2 years. So the bee program is a very, very vital part of this whole process. We now rehome them. We give them out to community. Could I just ask for just a small extension? We rehome them, we give them to the community gardens, and anything else that we have over, we have plenty of apiarists who come along and ask us for these extra hives. But I want to get to the point where my mind was changed from declaring an emergency, and it was from I won't mention the lady's name, but she sent me an email, and there was one paragraph where it really sort of struck me really good, and it said, "What are the implications for Moonee Valley City Council in declaring a climate emergency?" And this is what she wrote. "A declaration is not a legal obligation, but a statement of priorities. This does not, in my view, require Moonee Valley Council to review or change any existing commitments on emission reductions or climate adaptation in the MV 2040 strategy. The simple but powerful action of declaring a climate emergency will underpin Moonee Valley City Council's leadership on this issue and already comprehensive and adequate strategy response. Rather, it is a call to action to all agents around you that you require their collaboration to protect your community, and to the state and federal government for adequate support. Moonee Valley Council should consider how the declaration is externally communicated. It will require a clear explanation about what is in place. In what way does that not cause undue concern or worry to the community?" And when I read this, I actually read it about 3 times, and every single time I read it, I got something new out of it. And that's why when Councillor Marshall rang me, I said, "I'm happy to second your motion." And this was the paragraph that got me over the line, and so I'm happy to support you, Councillor Marshall.
Thank you, Councillor Sypek. Does any other councillor wish to speak to this motion? Councillor Serace.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I don't know if I could just add an item 3, or if I have to move an amendment on this, but...
There have to be an amendment.
An amendment. I'd like to move an amendment of item 3, that Council investigate the printing and distribution of information stickers to be placed on residents' waste bins, in brackets, similar to those distributed by Bass Coast Shire, and report back to the next suitable council meeting.
Okay. Councillor Serace has put up a formal amendment, which is on screen. So do I have a seconder for that formal amendment on screen? Seconder, Councillor Byrne. Thank you. Councillor Serace, would you like to speak just to the formal amendment?
Yes, thank you. I was actually in Phillip Island today, and I had to go down to the council there, and in their reception area and their information centre, they have these stickers that residents can pick up, put on their bins and know exactly what goes in those bins, because I'm pretty sure that whilst people have great intentions in our municipality to do the right thing and put the right thing in their bins, they kind of feel, well, does cardboard go in the yellow bin and does glass go in the yellow bin and all those things, and think, oh yes, it must do, and just do that without actually knowing exactly what has to go into those bins. So I think that we've all got a part to play in this emergency climate crisis and reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and I think that by educating our community and having that there present for them, it's a simple thing, but it's something that actually educates people to know exactly what goes in their bins. I mean, I myself, when I picked it up, I said, oh, I didn't know I could put clothing and thongs, etc. into my red bin. So I myself learnt some things that could go into certain bins and some things that shouldn't be. So I think this is a great initiative, and I think that if we can share that information and distribute that to our community, and they can stick those onto their bins, I think would be a great move forward in assisting in what we're trying to project here.
Thank you, Councillor Sorais. Councillor Byrne, would you like to speak just to the amendment?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just briefly, just to reiterate what Councillor Sorais said, that it's absolutely our role to be educating the community in terms of what to be putting into the bins. Like Councillor Sorais, I was sitting out the back and there was talk about whether or not you had to wash your bottles before you put them in the bin or not, and there was quite a conversation just amongst councillors and exec in terms of what you actually have to do. So everyone can be educated, continue to be educated, and I think that this is a really great idea, Councillor Sorais.
Thank you, Councillor Byrne. Any other councillor wish to speak just to the amendment? Councillor Marshall?
Again, that goes to highlight that collaboration that we need between council and community, and the educative role that we can play. Something that on so many levels is relatively simple, but in terms of the impact that it could have in reducing the contamination that we see within all of those streams of bins that we have. So we've got lots of things that we can do and that we should be doing and we need to be doing, so I'm happy to support this amendment to the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Marshall. Any other councillor wish to speak to the amendment? I'll put the amendment to the vote. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. So the amendment now forms part of the original motion. Councillor Sorais, did you wish to speak to the original motion?
Yes, just briefly. Look, most of the areas have already been covered by Councillor Marshall and Councillor Sypek, and I think this council is pretty much dedicated to our carbon footprint and reducing greenhouse emissions, as has been said by all of the things that we've done through our smart gardens programs that we offer, free events that people can get involved with. And I think every person has a role to play in climate change, everyone. And I think because this has come about, in my view, from population and development, supply and demand, I think that that's basically why we've come to this. And it's been brought to our attention even more so in recent times, as we're all aware through the media. And I think that for us to be able to play our role and for people in a simplistic way, as I've brought that here, I thought that was a fantastic initiative. I just happened to be looking for some other information there and I saw those and thought, oh great, I'll bring this along to council tonight, because it's a simple thing, but it's so easy for people to just stick on their bin when they lift the lid up to put something in. Oh no, hang on, I shouldn't be putting that in. So I think that that's a great opportunity for us to be able to share that information, and also that, as I said before, this council are leading the way in a lot of issues with reducing our emissions, and we shall continue to do so.
Thank you, Councillor Sorais. Any other councillor wish to speak to the motion? Councillor Cusack.
Thank you, Mayor, and well done, Councillor Marshall. I was thinking a bit about this, and I've ended up stealing a line from Neil Danaher, who many people know for a very different reason. But he recently said, when all is said and done, more is said than done. And this is an issue where there seems to have been a lot of saiding and very little doneing, and I won't stretch that any further because we might get into trouble. But declaring a climate emergency, and I take your point, Councillor Sypek, about the whole thing being a statement of priority. But for me, what this is for Moonee Valley Council is that this is about setting a platform for decision making for the future, for giving permission for our whole community to become actively participatory in the decisions that council is making that are about how we spend residents' dollars, but it's also a bit about how much the residents can direct us to make seriously good decisions about the neighbourhoods that everybody lives in. And we've often, we know that a lot of action starts very local and needs to build up. And so the old think global, act local has been around for a long, long time, but it's never more so than now, and and we need to be prompted by that. I think also that it's really critical that in taking this notion of emergency forward, that this is not, yes, the words disaster are used and so on like that, but some people, an emergency in my mind is like other emergencies. You can actually plan, you can change, you can turn things around, and if you've got a strength and a will to do it and be prepared to finance it and show people how they can play their part, no matter how small or how big it is, how courageous they have to be, it doesn't matter. Everybody can play a part in it. So we've got the opportunity to turn things around. We've got questions around emissions, which we all talk about, but we've also got to start thinking about how we look at those big issues about reversing the damage that's already been done, and so on like that. We've got to think a bit about how, from a council perspective, I need a bit of time, how as a council we need to be able to think about integrating climate change into all of our policy work. It needs to be on the bottom line of every decision that comes to this council in terms of our papers. So it's not just about the financials, it's not just about bits and pieces like that, but it is about where the impact is going to in terms of hitting the road. And it's well known, of course, that it's not, and it's so important to think about our rivers and creeks, the heat in the area, the events that happen like floods, the drought that 10 years ago, for those with short memories, might have forgotten how just about every sporting field in this municipality was unplayable, that we had health and safety issues all over the place, from little kids to old people, about trying to use anything that was green in this municipality. Do we need to go down a track where this is not able to be turned around, or that we suffer great loss before we can turn anything around? But it's things about how we engage business. It's a bit about how we work with community, as I said before. Many people have mentioned the notion of educators, but it's also about understanding risk. If there's one thing about climate change for some of the people who are bean counters, that by not acting, by not looking at integrated policies, by not thinking a bit further down the track about how adaptive technology can be put into place to facilitate transition, just think about what are the risks. New buildings get put up. We've spoken here tonight about planning decisions. Well, how can you make decent planning decisions in a world of climate change when we're actually putting people's health at risk, or we might be putting other factors in terms of quality of life totally at risk? And so seriously, the whole integration of those sorts of policies in 2040, they grab hold in the environmental planning area, but they have some real expression in health. We have to put out a warning every heat wave to the flats down in Flemington to advise people to keep drinking water, to stop, there is a serious chance of loss of life and so on like that. We need to also think a bit about how our community, our local areas are affected simply by the simple things where not taking charge of recycling properly, not taking charge of waste production, and not taking charge of negotiation that takes us into the regional debate and takes us into state debates and hopefully flows into national debates is impacting on our local community. So there's a reality here that all of us need to be part of some action. And so this call to arms, and that's what I see it as, is critical. And don't get lost in the atmospherics. I love what people are doing out in the streets of Melbourne right now. I'm an old lefty, I'm an old trade unionist. I don't have many more fights left in me, but I do remember the moratorium marches. I do remember a number of other really big things that have been critical social issues at the time, but this is much more than that, and it transcends that. And all of us have, as I said before, a part to play, and now we've got the process by which we've got a platform to start moving it forward, and so affect right now a community in 20 years' time and 30 years' time, and hopefully somewhere along the line we've alleviated some of the emergency down that track.
Thank you, Councillor Cusack.
Madam Mayor, just a point of clarification. I totally agree with what Councillor Cusack said, but in the beginning when you said that what I said about the statement of priorities, I was actually paraphrasing from an email that someone was telling me. Yeah. So it wasn't my thoughts, but it was something that changed my mind.
Thank you. Does any other councillor wish to speak to this motion? Councillor Byrne?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Be a little bit, probably not as passionate, but just a bit shorter maybe. I don't think I can compete with your passion, Councillor Cusack. Whilst I do absolutely support this, your motion, Councillor Marshall, it's magnificent. So together with the community, we must take action to reduce emissions. It's as simple as that. Council recognises that we need to reduce our carbon emissions to avoid the worst impacts of climate change, and we all have a part to play to achieve deep cuts to emissions, and this requires a shared effort across residents, businesses, council and other levels of government. The MB 2040 target that's already been set, it's such a shame that Councillor Goucher-Mirici isn't here tonight, because like Councillor Marshall heads the Enviro pack, she heads the MB 2040 pack, and I'm sure she would have spoken extremely passionately about all the work that was done in that piece of work to achieve the zero net emissions for our community, which is one of Council's goals. And it's backed up by so much evidence, science, to align with the Paris Agreement that Councillor Marshall touched on before. I believe it is an ambitious target, but in a rapidly developing area. And you can see that by the community support that's here tonight. It is a positive step forward to ensure that carbon emissions are dramatically reduced within the community. But as Councillor Cusack has touched on, we actually need to do something. We need to have more than just words. So tonight, through this notice of motion and through the petition and through everyone sitting in the chamber tonight, it's really good that it has come to the forefront of this council. So I hope that when the budget comes in June next year, instead of just looking at the sexy ideas of what normally comes into a council chamber come budget time, we really take climate change and what we can do as a council seriously, because it is our responsibility. I would like to acknowledge the public sentiment of a more ambitious target, and I think that we all need to work together to get that. What has been achieved over the past 5 years, 3 years, 1 week, or 2 weeks since the protests have started is amazing. So who's to say what will actually occur by 2040? Hopefully everyone's on board. Hopefully the supermarkets aren't selling ridiculous little plastic items, and hopefully we're all being really appropriate and the education is going up through the generations. Other things that as council we can do, I know from the events team point of view, you know, we really need to look at what we're handing out to people in our show bags. Are we still giving out individually wrapped pens and rulers and items that all have covered in plastics, fireworks, all of these little things all added up? We really need to think about what picture we're painting for the community. It might be fun, but where does it put us in terms of the climate emergency that we're calling on tonight? So very supportive of this motion. I think it's great, and I really encourage the conversation to continue. Logan Shield, who's a local resident who's been in contact, and Councillor Marshall mentioned before, has been amazing. And there's obviously so many people who have been amazing in this space. 10 seconds. I'd also like to say thanks to Sarah and Jessie from Moonee Valley, who've helped me put together some of the notes, and everyone who's been a part of it, because there has been a lot of work done, but there's a heap more to do. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Byrne. Any other councillor wish to speak? Councillor Nation?
Thank you, Mayor, and a lot has been said, and I concur with 99% of the sentiments shared. And I think for me the crux of this motion and the declaration of an emergency is a kick up the butt, not to be complacent. Like we and fellow councillors have shared that we've put some solar panels on roofs and we've replaced some globes. But the moment that you get complacent and you think you've done enough, you won't be doing enough. And you look at the goals we've set as a council, right through to Moonee Valley 2040, that is only one generation. And we're talking about changing some massive habits, trying to divert 90% of landfill, 90% of waste going to landfill. We're trying to, as a council, by 2020, reduce or have no carbon emissions. But as a broader city, we're trying to reduce these significantly by 2040. And it's that change in behaviour that we as a council need to instill in our community, both residents and businesses, so we all question our choices and what we're doing. And like I think of Councillor Thrace, your amendment to put stickers on bins is good, but how are we then going to get 90% of waste diverted from landfill? What are we doing as a council? We need to be innovative. You look at over in Japan, they have 8 different recycling bins. Now, there are ways and steps that you can take that aren't just 2 bins, this is what you put in them, but what can we as a council do and pitch to state government, federal government, etc. I had a good example living in a small townhouse with no backyard, and I asked customer service downstairs if I could get a smaller green bin because I don't have any green waste because I don't have a backyard, I've got a concrete yard, but I want to put my food waste in there. No council only offers the big 240 litre. So it's little things like that. Well, all right, we're getting more and more people living in smaller dwellings, in apartments. How can we help them to contribute rather than just saying, no, too hard, we don't do that. And that's our job as councillors, to continually challenge each other. Our job with officers, to challenge them and for them to challenge us. And our job with the community, to challenge the community and get the community to challenge us. And the community has challenged us tonight and pitched to us to one of us to declare a climate emergency, and Councillor Marshall has very much so done that. But it is so critical that every single decision we make here at Council, every single decision we make during the day, we think about the legacy we're leaving for the next generations. We're thinking about the legacy that we inherited from the traditional owners of the land, who were the best proponents of being able to respect the environment and renew and treat the land with respect. And you look at our consumer, high consumption, consumer-driven lifestyle and wonder what we've got to, and as Councillor Cusack said, if we can actually avert the disaster and the damage that we've done, and reverse. So I commend Councillor Marshall, I commend our community and our environment pack for getting us as councillors to make this statement. And now when the statement's done, we need to act. We need to change our behaviours, each other's behaviours, and we've got to be accountable for what we say we're going to do. A strategy is great sitting on the shelf, but unless people aren't rolling it out, then it means nothing. At least most of that strategy is in electronic form, and it's not a massive document that sits on the shelf and is another use of resources. So that's enough rambling from me. I commend Councillor Marshall on this motion. Let's do more. Let's all play our role, and let's at least try to stop and then reverse some of the damage that's been done over the past 20 to 30 years.
Thank you, Councillor Nation. Everyone has spoken, so I'll put that to the vote, but I must commend Councillor Marshall for putting this up, and you made a really great speech, so thank you. So I shall put that to the vote. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. The next item of business is urgent business. I don't think we have any items of urgent business tonight. Do any councillors have anything they'd like to report on in their roles as delegates? No. The next item of business is confidential reports, and as there are none this evening, this concludes our business on tonight's agenda. Thank you to members of the public gallery and those watching via live streaming for your interest. We shall be back in 2 weeks' time. I declare this meeting closed. Good night.